Mother Earth, walking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws, prisons, and courts. Screaming white-hot flames and agony, she challenged millions of headhunters, dragging and ripping apart impossible tender moments of time, shipping vessels of history, ancient history, destroying the fabric, the godlike claw of destiny, of a people, with a gun, a knife, a cannon, building the hideous wall of blood called slavery. She challenged it with burning eyes and black skin, torn skin, whipped skin, degraded skin, smashed skin, dehumanized skin, dehumanized skin. Strong enough to bring her free, strong enough to be free. To be free.
To everyone, I pray all is well and this finds you in great health and spirits. On Saturday, December 7th from 4 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Operation Dawn is presenting No Nuclear War, a call for reason at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. What is this event and why is it necessary? Well, go to nonuclearwar.com for additional information, nonuclearwar.com for additional information. And also, let's connect some dots and find out. Okay.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they happen in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historical context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that impact the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is, how close are we to World War III, and how concerned should we be about it becoming a nuclear conflict? And my guest is none other than, he's going to be the moderator for the panel discussion, No Nuclear War, a Call for Reason, as I said at the open, which will take place Saturday, December 7th from 4 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. He's a former United States Marine Corps intelligence officer, former UN Special Commission's weapons inspector, author, commentator, colleague, and friend. Scott Ritter, my brother, welcome back to the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
So I want to say this again. Saturday, December 7th, from 4 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Operation Dawn is presenting No Nuclear War, a Call for Reason at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Folks, go to nonuclearwar.com for additional information. Scott, earlier today, Friday, speaking at the Supreme State Council of the Russian-Belarus Union State, President Putin said the following: "Our particular concern, naturally, is the situation in the European region, in particular, of course, in Ukraine. Western countries are deliberately escalating tensions. They are the ones who caused today's tragedy and continue to escalate the situation." End quote. Your thoughts on that perspective? And with that, how close is the world to World War III and a nuclear exchange?
Well, I mean, first of all, we need to understand, let's put it in a broader context. Putin isn't speaking in a vacuum. When he speaks of, the problems between Russia and Europe, in Europe and Ukraine, it's Russia and the collective West, led by the United States. The United States has as its official policy the strategic defeat of Russia. I don't know if most Americans realize this. We have a policy that says it's not that we want to contain Russia, that we are looking to undermine Russia, things of that nature. We're talking about the strategic defeat of Russia. Strategic defeat means the total collapse of Russia as a society. It means that the government led by Vladimir Putin has been toppled. It means that the Russian economy has collapsed. It means that Russia itself is disintegrating into component parts as opposed to being a unified state. It is the end of Russia. So after I've said this now, have I put Russia's concerns in a proper perspective? There's a lot of people out there saying, well, Russia's just overreacting. I mean, after all, Russia invaded Ukraine. What did Russia expect? Well, Russia didn't invade Ukraine. If Russia invaded Ukraine, this war would have been over a long time ago. Russia intervened in Ukraine in what is known as a special military operation to achieve certain political outcomes. And it is achieving these outcomes, much to the embarrassment of the collective West, the United States in particular.
Can I jump in really quick and just add a point of emphasis? Russia responded to aggression on its border by the United States through Ukraine. Is that fair?
Well, that's a statement of fact. That is what people would say if Russia invaded Ukraine in February of 2022. They never say that Ukraine had assembled 60 to 80,000 NATO trained forces on the borders of the Donbass in January 2022 that precipitated Russia's preemptive act of self-defense. Now, people would say, Scott, you're getting legalistic here. Well, yeah. Article 51 of the United Nations Charter allows two conditions under which nations may go to war. One is if the Security Council, through a Chapter 7 resolution, has authorized the use of military force to resolve a situation of global security concern. For instance, the conflict that I participated in, what we call Operation Desert Storm, was fought with the authority of a Chapter 7 resolution in response to Iraq's invasion occupation of Kuwait. The other one is if a nation, having been attacked, has a legitimate right of self-defense. That's what that's what Russia has said. Now people say, well, wait a minute, it was Russia that attacked Ukraine. How could Russia possibly say this is self-defense? But this is where you have to understand, there is a notion in self-defense known as preemptive self-defense, and it's legitimate. It actually is derived from an incident between the United States and Great Britain, I think back in 1840s or something, they're called the Caroline Affair, where the British intercepted an American ship that was landing weapons and ammunition and such to Canadian rebels. And the British intercepted the vessel in the United States said, well, you attacked us, that you have no legitimate right to do this. And it went to the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court, in its findings said, no, the British actually had a right of preemptive self-defense, meaning that when they notice there's an imminent threat emerging, they're allowed to take that action necessary to eliminate that imminent threat. They don't have to wait for the threat to manifest itself. And so Russia, in seeing this massing of NATO trained troops, and I just want to remind everybody that the United States set up a major training facility together with NATO in Western Ukraine in 2015, and began training a battalion of troops every 55 days to NATO standards. And they put a slide up, I think around 2017, that bragged about that. They said, we train a battalion of troops every 55 days here in Western Ukraine. Then they drew an arrow so they can go over here and kill Russians. I mean, it's straight up what we were all about. We're training Ukrainians to fight the Russians on our behalf. And this began in 2015. But 2014 was when the United States, together with the European Union, carried out a coup d'etat. We call it the Ukrainians call it the Revolution of Dignity. We call it the Maidan Revolution. Some people call it, the coup that it is. But the bottom line, it was a concerted effort by the United States and the European Union to overthrow the constitutionally elected and mandated government of President Viktor Yanukovych and replace it with a government of our picking. There's the infamous or famous phone call between Victoria Nuland and the U.S. ambassador, where she speaks of, the Yats, our boy Yats, and we're going to put him in power. I mean, literally, we handpicked the Ukrainian government. We mobilized the Banderist movement, militarized it, and injected it into the situation. And we've been paying the price ever since, because as soon as they overthrew Viktor Yanukovych, they began a cultural genocide against Russian speakers, people who practice the Russian Orthodox faith, anything dealing with Russia was now under attack. And this prompted Vladimir Putin to intervene. Now people say, well, what right did he have to intervene? I think in 2005, Vladimir Putin gave a speech before the Russian Federal Assembly, sort of the Senate of Russia. And it's a speech where he talked about his duties and responsibilities as the president of not the Russian state, but the Russian nation. This is the speech, by the way, it's been misquoted. It's the one that he says the greatest tragedy of the last century was the collapse of the Soviet Union. And people said, see, Vladimir Putin, he's just a Soviet KGB dude at heart. He just wants to bring the Soviet Union back. No, he said, because they never listen to the second part, because overnight, tens of millions of Russians lost their nation, lost their home, became homeless. And that's true. If you were a Russian in the Soviet Union, living in any one of the republics of the Soviet Union that wasn't called Russia, and overnight the Soviet Union collapses, and you've spent your entire life looking at Moscow as the center of your universe, and suddenly you're told, no, it's Riga, no, it's Vilnius, No, it's Tbilisi. No, it's Kiev. And you say, well, wait, I'm a Russian. No, you're a Ukrainian now. You're something else. You're not a Russian. Um, and then to have these nationalists in these groups not only say you're not a Russian, but we're going to penalize you because you think you're a Russian. And Putin said this is unacceptable. The Russian nation is defined by people not by ethnicity, but by collective history, by language, by religion, by a belief in a unified collectivism. And he said, my job is to protect these people. So even if you're not in the borders of the Russian Federation, I have a responsibility to protect you. And Ukraine is one of the places where there's a large Russian population and Russian-speaking population that has been under attack from the new Ukrainian government ever since 1991. But in 2014, when this coup d'etat took place, they were specifically targeted by this American brokered nationalist government that began what is called an anti-terrorist operation. Again, Americans probably don't realize this, but I think it was in June of 2014, Viktor Poroshenko, the president of Ukraine, declared war against the Russian people. Literally, he said, "We're going to bomb," and they started bombing. The rape of Mariupol isn't just semantics. The nationalists, the Azov battalion, it wasn't the Azov battalion at that time. It was the right sector. It was the Banderists, came into Mariupol, seized the city, created the Azov battalion. Azov is the Sea of Azov there. They said, we own this town. And they literally murdered, raped, imprisoned, and drove out the Russian-speaking population. In the most brutal kind of activity. Nobody talks about it in the West. We just ignore it. We pretend it didn't happen. And then they started to turn. They turned their eyes on Crimea in March of 2014. The Russians went, that ain't going to happen. And so they carried out their soft power coup there. And Crimea was absorbed into the Russian Federation. Why? 97% of the population says they're Russian, and they are. They're historically Russian. They've never thought of themselves as anything but Russian. More difficult is the areas known as the Donbass, Donetsk and Lugansk, strong Russian populations, Russian-speaking populations, but their borders were acknowledged to be inside Ukraine. It was a gift of Stalin or Lenin, I think, back in the 20s. But again, Ukraine back then, as an entity, was part of the Soviet Union. It wasn't a standalone nation state. It was part of a larger entity that was dominated by the Russians, and so there was no issues with these, for these Russians. But after 1991. They began to be treated as foreigners within their own country. And finally, after 2014, when the Ukrainian nationalists turned their eyes when the Ukrainian government called them terrorists and started bombing them, they rose up and Russia came to their assistance covertly at first, and then more overtly. And it led to a major conflict between the Russian-backed Russian separatists in the Donbass and the Ukrainian government. In late 2014, 2015, things didn't go well for the Ukrainian army. They got surrounded and they were going to be all killed, wiped out. And that's when Poroshenko now said, oh my goodness, I'm in trouble. If I lose the army, I'll lose everything. He turned to his allies in France, the ones who helped bring him into power through the coup d'etat, France and Germany, the EU, and said, I need your help. And they intervened with Putin. And begged that Putin not slaughter the Ukrainian army, that Putin put forward a peace plan. And so Putin did. Putin worked out the Minsk Accords, Minsk I, Minsk II. This was a front. We now know that Poroshenko, Angela Merkel, and Francois Hollande, who was the president of France at the time, all admit they weren't serious about peace. They were just desperate to find something to prevent the Ukrainian army from being slaughtered, to buy time. So guess what? The U.S. can build that training base in Western Ukraine, and they can build the Ukrainian army up so that it can successfully complete the mission in the Donbass. This is what it's always been about, ladies and gentlemen.
And to that point, just quickly, you're saying they've admitted this. That's not just your opinion. Angela Merkel is on record in a couple of interviews saying exactly what you said. We never intend. People need to remember Putin was saying during that entire time, all you have to do is implement Minsk and we're good.
Yep.
He's on record when he met with Biden in Geneva in 2020, and I think it was July of 22, before that February 21. He told Biden, we've already solved this. All you have to do is implement Minsk. It's been negotiated, agreed to, and we're good. And the United States ignored that. I got
no, it's worse than that.
Shelly H, thank you very much for the super sticker. But again, I did, and I'll please elaborate. But I just can't reiterate enough. This is not your opinion. Folks, all you have to do is Google Merkel admits Minsk was a fraud, and you will come up with AP stories, Washington Post stories, New York Times stories, and Halan came behind her and admitted it. Yes, Angela is right. We were lying. Now, Scott, continue.
Well, and Poroshenko did too. All three of them have publicly admitted. I mean, I like my opinions. They tend to be fact-based and all that, but you're right. If this isn't Scott Ritter pontificating on what I believe the world is, these are statements of fact. Fact is everything I've told you in leading up are documented statements of fact. It's not me trying to reinvent history and spin history to support a narrative. This is absolute statements of fact backed up by documents, statements, etc. But when Biden met with Putin in Geneva in 2021, and Putin made this plea, because the reason why they were meeting is that the Russians were moving troops around. And the Russians were moving troops around to match.
Russians were moving troops around because if my memory serves me correctly, in April of 21, Ukraine sent like 80,000 troops to the border, and Putin called Biden and said, if you don't remove those troops from my border, my response will be asymmetrical and disproportionate. You need to do this immediately. And if I've got the history right, Biden hung up the phone and turned to, I don't know, Corn Pop or whoever it was that was standing in the Oval Office and said, hey, man, put your rusty razor away and get those troops off the border because we're going to have a problem. Isn't that what precipitated their meeting in Geneva?
Yes, the movement of troops, the buildup by the Ukrainians, and Putin said, and remember, it's not just a buildup of the Ukrainian forces; it's positioning them to strike the Donbass. What a lot of people don't realize, in 2014, when these rebels rose up, they created large armed forces that were backed by Russia. As I said, both covertly and overtly. But as Minsk went on, these are places that have economies, and the people that were in these armed forces are the workers of these economies. And they had declared their independence, but nobody had recognized their independence, and so they were in a very difficult situation in terms of advancing the well-being of the citizens in both Donetsk and Lugansk. And remember, they only had a small enclave. The Ukrainian forces had occupied actually the majority of Lugansk and the majority of Donetsk. The Russian enclaves were actually, the Russian-speaking enclaves were a smaller part of the territory, but they demobilized. Many of the units that had been formed up in 2014, 2015, 2016, 2017 during the fighting, as Minsk settled into this sort of unresolved status, but the fighting was more skirmishing as opposed to large-scale fighting. The bulk of the Donetsk and Lugansk people's militias demobilized. They went from having 60,000 troops down to having 10, 12, 15,000 troops. That's not a lot. And now here come the Ukrainians bringing in 60 to 80,000 troops. And the Russians are saying, no, this isn't going to happen. Because if you cross that border, you're gonna take this over. So the Russians started matching that deployment. And then of course we start screaming, you can't move your troop, you're threatening. And Russia, like, we're moving our troops within our own borders. It's really none of your damn business. You don't get to dictate how we do things. But if you're so concerned about it, then get them to stop doing what they're doing with the troops that you trained to do exactly what they're doing. And so Putin stared Biden in the eyes and said, you want to resolve this thing, Minsk. And here's the point I was trying to make. It wasn't that Biden ignored him.
Okay.
He said, okay, I'm going to instruct, this is a quote, I'm going to instruct Tony Blinken to get with the Germans and the French and the Ukrainians, and we're going to make this thing happen. And Putin went, okay, then the problem solved. We're good. and
was
then,
that in Geneva?
Yeah.
Okay.
Straight up lied to him, and then he lied about other things. They talked.
So wait a minute. So when President Putin gave Joe Biden that letter saying, I'm giving you my security demands in writing, and I expect your response back to me to be in writing, that's where Biden didn't ignore him. Biden said, okay, I'm going to direct Tony Blinken to talk to France and so on. And that didn't happen. That was what.
Well, no, in Geneva, I'd have to go back and look at the record. In Geneva, okay. I don't think anything was handed over in writing. I don't think the Russians demanded anything in writing. What Geneva was a verbal agreement.
Okay.
That led to December. If you remember December after, because what happened is Putin kept calling him. He didn't call the wife, but he kept going, hey, Joe, what about that Minsk thing? We talked about it in June. It's now August, and things in silence. And then, so finally, the Russians confronted the Germans and the French in the fall of 2021 and said, all right, put up or shut up time. Are you going to do Minsk or not? Because the Ukrainians are building up this army. There's talk. We have intelligence. It says they're going to do something. Are you going to insist on Minsk being signed right now or not? And the French and the Germans went, no, we're not going to insist on it. So that's when the Russians said Minsk is finished. And in December 17th, Russia then handed over this formal treaty vehicle, one to NATO, one to the United States. And on this one, they said, this is our stuff in writing, and you have to take this seriously, and you have to respond in writing. We're not going to take verbal. We're not going to take this, because we did that in Geneva, and you lied to us. You lied to us. So here it is in writing, what we require to prevent us from doing the military technical response, which means.
And they lied then the same way James Baker lied to Gorbachev in 91 or 92 when Baker said to Gorbachev, allow for the reunification of Germany and NATO will not move any further eastward towards the Soviet Union.
Yeah, and that was a mistake for the Soviet Union not to get that in formal treaty-like. And I'll tell you, this is in speaking to Russians at some very senior levels. They've said the day of us believing the West is honorable, believing the West when they give you a handshake or whatever is over. We don't trust you anymore. You lie, you cheat, you steal. Anything we do with you is no longer going to be on the basis of we view you as sort of our potential friends. It's viewed based on the fact that you are an adversary who has lied to us over and over again to achieve strategic advantages that are designed to defeat us. The Russians no longer trust the West. So they say, we recognize that we're going to have to live with you and we'd like to live peacefully with you, but any relationship we have will be spelled out in writing. Basically, the Russians aren't going to get married based upon "I love you." They're going to make you sign the most complicated prenup you've ever seen in your life.
So to the audience. First of all, let me see if I can find this quickly. Because Sandra says, to you, Scott Ritter, that she's so grateful for all that you do. You are her hero. The Scott Ritter fan club just continues to grow. Folks, this history is important, because without it, you cannot do any type of proper assessment or analysis of the reality that we find ourselves in. And so that's why we have to keep repeating this. Because it has to become rote memory for you, or else what you're hearing and what you're experiencing will make absolutely no sense. So with that history as the predicate, I go back to the original question. Are we staring down the abyss of World War III? And if so, how concerned should we be about a nuclear exchange?
Let me answer by reversing that, because
Okay.
it's, we oftentimes overuse, we are in World War III, we are this, we are that. And it's like the boy who cried wolf, it just say it over and over again. And people are like, yeah, right. And then eventually the wolf shows up and eats you. Well, that's what's happening right now. The wolf has arrived. The situation we find ourselves in today, with Russia, the United States, and NATO, the collective West, it can be characterized as the most dangerous situation ever in the post-World War era, in the nuclear era. Now, people go, wait a minute, Scott, there was that Cuban Missile Crisis. That was pretty bad. We have people tell us about Able Archer 83 and how dangerous that was. Aren't you exaggerating a little bit? Doesn't that diminish the strength of your argument? What I'll say is this. The Cuban Missile Crisis, the nuclear arsenals of the United States and Russia were very small at that time. A nuclear war then would have been bad. I'm not saying nuclear war wouldn't be bad, but it wouldn't be the global ending event, because you just didn't have enough nuclear weapons to do that. But here's the thing. It was resolved because Kennedy and Khrushchev were talking. It was resolved because ambassadors were meeting. It was resolved because there was a recognized back channel to have sensitive discussions to avoid political backlash from both the United States and the Soviet Union. They were able to come up with a compromise solution. I think a lot of people forget that part of the history. They say, oh, the Russians back down. No, it was Kennedy who blinked, because the Russians said, we put these missiles in Cuba because you already have missiles in Turkey and Italy aimed right at us. People don't realize in Chile Air Base outside of Izmir, we had Jupiter missiles already installed, loaded, fueled nuclear warheads ready to be fired right into the Soviet Union. One of their main targets was this, I think it was Pitsunda. It's a dacha, a presidential dacha on the Black Sea coast, where Khrushchev often spent time. And when a Jupiter missile was fired, it would hit Pitsunda about 9 minutes later. So Khrushchev's on vacation, where he goes a lot, and 9 minutes away is the mechanism of his death, and there's nothing the Russians can do about it. If it's launched, Khrushchev dies. And the Soviets said, we're not going to put up with this. So if you're not going to remove them, we're going to do the same thing to you. They went to Cuba to put similar class missiles in place to have the same threat to the United States. And guess what happened? Kennedy ordered the Jupiter missiles removed. It was supposed to be top secret. No one's supposed to talk about it because it was politically sensitive and all that stuff. And Khrushchev's like, no problem. We'll keep it chill. But everybody's like, Kennedy made the Soviets back down. No, Kennedy backed down. Kennedy agreed to remove the Jupiter missiles, and then the Russians pulled their missiles out, and that's the history. But it was a dangerous situation, but there was talk going on, compromises going on. Today, there is no meaningful dialogue. We found out that after the ATACMS attacks and and such, by Ukraine against Russian targets, that there was a phone call from Gerasimov, who's the chief of staff of the Russian military, and I guess General Brown, who's the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and they had a conversation. The conversations basically said that the Russians are going to carry out exercises in the Mediterranean using hypersonic missiles, and the U.S. fleet needs to get the hell out of the way because these things are going downrange. And so they deconflicted there. And then the rumor is that he also put Brown on notice about the consequences of continuing to attack Russia with ATACMS missiles, that the consequences would be dire, and they could lead to nuclear war. And so that message was sent and reiterated. Not too many people are talking about that because they don't like it when the Russians threaten to use nuclear weapons against us, because that makes us look weak. We can't back down. The Russians are bluffing. We're letting the Russians control the narrative. I spent all day yesterday walking the halls of congressional office buildings, meeting with a dozen representatives and their staffs to talk about just this issue, which is the ATACMS attacks against Russia, which, by the way, is the trigger for nuclear war. If we continue to do this, there will be a nuclear war.
So where is, okay, I'll frame the question this way, and if it's improperly framed, you will correct me. Where's the disconnect in the messaging? So if the Russian general calls American General Brown and says, okay, you need to move your ships out the way, because we're about to send these missiles, and we don't want to hit the wrong thing. We don't want there to be any type of possible confusion. Get your ships out of the way, because we're going to push this button. And General Brown, being a general, understands what he's being told. General Brown calls Biden or calls Tony Blinken or whoever the hell calls Corn Pop, whoever the hell is in control of this thing, and says, the Russians just told me that this is what they're about to do. Who's not realizing or believing the reality right before them? The chicken hawks like Tony Blinken? Or so does my question make sense?
Yeah. No, this is the problem we found we ran into, because you had asked a question earlier about, basically you said this is why history is important. These are why the facts are important. I will tell you right now that in Congress, they have no knowledge of this history. They have an alternative narrative, and the alternative narrative gets shifted depending on which policy they're pushing. Right now, as the Ukraine hawks are coming to grips with the reality of a Russian strategic victory in Ukraine, they've suddenly become fans of a negotiated solution. But their thing is, it has to be a solution that is equitable to the Ukrainians and the Russians, meaning that the Russians, having achieved this strategic victory, will be compelled in the negotiations to act as if they were defeated, to accept, for instance, a freezing of a front line that, as we speak, is moving to the detriment of Ukraine.
So they're looking for another Bay of Pigs scenario where the United States blinked, but the story, the history as it's being reported is, and thank you, Mile High Brother, for your sticker. But so the United States is looking for a revisionist reality similar to what they were able to get with the Bay of Pigs. Russia blinked and took the missiles out, where no, the reality was Kennedy blinked. That's what they're trying to create again now.
It's not just that, though, because the consequences of Bay of Pigs was just embarrassment.
Right.
No alliance folded.
Okay, now this is a flat out ass whooping that they don't want to admit to.
Correct.
Okay.
But no, this is worse, because the ass whooping they're getting in Ukraine, if it manifests itself, Leon, look, the world is changing because of the
Right.
lunacy of the decisions that were made to back Ukraine and
Right.
compel Russia to to the action. And I want to say that Russia was compelled to go into Ukraine. Russia
Right.
didn't want to go into Ukraine. That's the alternative narrative. Russia invaded. No, Russia had no other choice because of the policies that we were putting on that were designed to strategically defeat Russia. Never forget that. But here's the thing. Germany, because remember the Minsk, of course. We
Right.
talk about Minsk. We talk about Germany and France. Germany today is facing absolute societal political collapse.
Mm-hmm.
There's a political party right now that's on the ascendancy, Alternative for Deutschland, and they have an election coming up early next year. And they said, if we win this election, we're leaving the European Union. I'll say that one more time just so people understand. If AFD wins the election, they're withdrawing from the European Union. That's the end of the European Union, ladies and gentlemen. It cannot survive a German withdrawal. And it begins the collapse of NATO. Now, France, that other stalwart partner in the Minsk Accords. Macron just gave, I don't know if you saw the hysteric presentation he just made. I am not going to resign. You voted for me for 5 years. I'm going to stay here. Wah, wah, wah. Why? Because he got waxed at the polls. His minority government that he picked in, and because he couldn't handle the fact that his opponents who won out of Ukraine won the right to be the government of France. He put a minority government. There's a no confidence vote coming. It's going to collapse. And now he's going to have a paralyzed state because the parliament and the presidency don't see eye to eye. And over 60% of the French people say Macron's got to go. So France and Germany are in total collapse, all because of the decision to go to support Ukraine. Literally, it's destroyed. And this isn't just the end of the European Union. It is the end of NATO. NATO, look at Mark Rutte. I've been reading people my entire life. And I don't know if you saw, I mean, I always made fun of my wife. She's a very good person, by the way. Her heart is so pure. And she keeps telling me, you can't say bad things about people, even when they deserve bad things to be said about them. And I would make fun of Stoltenberg, the former Secretary General, call him stuttering Jan, because he'd get up there and he'd get so nervous that he can't speak. And he starts to shake. Rutte got up there and he's talking and he's literally twitching just like this nervous kid. His legs are twitching, his arms are twitching. Because he's in a panic. He knows the truth that NATO is done. It is the house of cards, and already that first card has fallen, and it's going to just start collapsing in on itself. There's no recovering. When he got picked, I said he's going to be the last Secretary General of NATO, and I believe that. Mm-hmm. Europe is in a panic right now, an absolute panic. This situation is over. And Ukraine, the fate of NATO and the fate of Europe now has been linked in the mindset of not just the Europeans, but the United States to Ukraine. And so they have to do something in Ukraine that allows them to say, we won. And how do you do that, though, when you've lost? I mean, it is such a delusional environment. And walking through Congress, these congressmen, when you start talking to them, they have no appreciation of the history. All they've done is armed themselves with some version of the alternative, narrative that there's no fact-based. And it always starts off, well, Putin is a brutal dictator who brutally invaded Ukraine, and we can't let that stand. The Ukrainian people are fighting for democracy and freedom, and we have to do this, that, and the other thing. And so there's this delusion.
They believe that? Because in the piece I wrote, the analysis of the post-election requiem for a failed candidate and party, one of the things I said was the worst thing are the lies you tell yourself. And even worse than that are the lies you tell yourself and believe. They honestly believe that crap?
Well, now you're asking me to get in the head of a narcissistic individual who ran for office thinking that they can solve the entire world's problems. So there's already a personality disorder manifested in the vast majority of the people who sit in the Congress. But, you can, if you allow yourself to be ignorant of the facts,
Okay.
then it's very easy for you to
Right.
believe that which conforms to the narrative that you have created yourself.
Okay. You are correct.
And so this is what I believe. It's not as though they know the truth. Remember, we're talking about representatives who are dumber than dirt, most of them. They're managed by their staffs. Their job
That's
coming
true.
in is to vote for certain things that the system is telling them to vote. Very few representatives actually dig into the dirt and know exactly what they're talking about.
Okay.
And the majority of them, if you're not on the House Intelligence Committee, if you're not on the Armed Services Committee, if you're not on the Foreign Affairs Committee, then Ukraine isn't your remit.
Right.
I don't know how many times I was told by representatives or their staff that
this is not my area.
I do building highways, and I'm big into immigration right now, and I'm doing this.
I'm on the Education Committee.
Yeah, but I'm not on these. And I said, well, one of them said, my focus is the health of Americans. I said, you don't think a nuclear war would be the most unhealthy thing to ever happen to Americans? Well, yes, you have a point there. And I said, so why isn't stopping a nuclear war your number one priority? Well, I mean, I sympathize with you, but I'm not on the House, and I'm not allowed to think. You see, if I don't get a briefing from the House Intelligence Committee, I'm not allowed to articulate any notion of independent thought on this issue. I'm scared. Go away, go away, go away. They literally are. This is Congress. It's a dysfunctional entity full of people who don't. There's a really nice guy. I don't want to say anything if he's watching. I'm not using his name, and I'm not going to use who he's associated with because he has that. Very informed former military guy, and we were talking, and I said, I just brought up, because we're talking about escalation. I said, you do know the Russians just used the Oreshnik missile, which is a strategic system, the first time in the history of strategic systems existing that one has been used in combat. And he's like, yes, and I said, and that's an escalation. He goes, yes, and I said, and you do know that weapon wouldn't have been used except for the fact that Donald Trump withdrew from the INF treaty, the treaty that I, implemented back in the day. He goes, yes, but the Russians were cheating on the INF. And I'm just sitting there going, you have no clue. I mean, and I had just finished working with him on correcting the historical narrative of, of the ATACMS missiles and Russia's concerns. And so I don't want to re-educate him on,
right.
The how intelligence, misconstrued a certain launch, got it wrong. I mean, I don't want to get into the weeds here, but I've researched this thing over and over again. The Russians were not cheating on the INF treaty. We were looking for an excuse. We found an anomaly in the intelligence collection that we knew was wrong, but because the data could suggest something else, we ran with that. We accused the Russians of doing something. The Russians going, we didn't do that. Give us the proof. And we're like, well, we can't. It's secret intelligence. We went to Europe and NATO and said, the Russians are cheating. And the NATO committee went, it's like, show us the pictures, man. Show us the pictures. We want to see the pictures. And we can't show. Wait a minute, come on. You said they're cheating. Show us the pictures. You mean you don't have any pictures? Well, how do you know they're cheating? I mean, you're sitting there saying they're cheating, and you're telling me that you don't have anything to back it up. Even Europe doesn't believe the Russians. Politically, they had to say it. But the bottom line is, nobody did the deep dig to say, this is. I did. I dug as deep as you can get, and I come from an arms control intelligence background, and I took it down to the nuts and bolts, and I went, Russians are cheating. Moreover, we know they're not cheating. We just went with this. But as I said, the job of Congress isn't to be informed in the history. The job of Congress is to create a narrative that allows them to support the policy. So they have accepted it. All you have to tell Congress is Russia cheated on the INF treaty, and that's why Donald Trump withdrew from it. Yeah, baby, that's the story we're going to tell. They don't want to hear the data. All you have to say is that Russia illegally invaded Ukraine, which is a thriving democracy. And well, then, of course, we have to support the Ukrainians. So Congress has misled them. But what I was able to do in Congress is break down this whole complexity of, are we on the cusp of nuclear war, to explain it in terms that even the simple of this got it. And I said, where the Russians are viewing the use of ATACMS missiles against Russian soil, pre-2014 border Russian soil, as an attack by the United States on Russia. And well, I'll tell you that I'll get to quote somebody who I can quote by name, Marjorie Taylor Greene.
Uh-oh.
Now, as soon as I say her name,
Uh-oh.
you see a lot of people going, "Oh my God, she's horrible. She's
uh-oh.
She's this, she's that, she's this, she's that. Why would you?" And that was, I have to be honest, when I was told I was meeting Marjorie Taylor Greene, I'm like, whoa, this is going to be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
She is one of the most intelligent people I've ever met. She is articulate. She is informed. She knows the details, and she can say it. And as soon as I started talking about the attack, she goes, "What if the Chinese went down to Mexico and got the Mexican cartels and gave them a bunch of Chinese missiles and targeted them and gave them the data and let the Mexican cartel push the button, and then they could attack American military bases inside the territory of the United States?" She goes, "We view that as an attack on the United States by China, and we would never let that happen." And I went, my job is done. She gets it. She got it immediately. And the point is, everybody I talked to got it. Even the people that are so pro-Ukraine, they got it. They're going, yeah, that's not. And I said, so the Russians now view that there is a de facto state of war between Russia and the United States, that the United States has declared war on Russia, and Russia has to respond accordingly. And they're all like, yeah, they got it. So I was successful in taking this whole complex narrative, going to Congress, and getting agreement across the board that the ATACMS, the use of ATACMS, creates the condition for Russian use of nuclear weapons.
Mm-hmm.
Now the question is that a bad thing? Leon, seriously, you'd say, well, Scott, of course it's a bad thing. But I literally had one member of Congress, because I said, my understanding of the U.S. intelligence briefing to Congress is that the Russians are bluffing, and therefore you don't think it's real. And he's a man who received the briefings. He said, Scott, that's not my take. The take I got was that the Russians aren't bluffing, and this is the part that should scare you. And the response on the part of Congress was, okay, if Russia wants a limited nuclear war over this, maybe that's what we need to do.
Limited.
Yeah, well, there's they believe there will be no limited nuclear war. They should read Russian doctrine. There's no such thing as a limited war. But this is why Thomas Buchanan, the director of plans for the Strategic Command, Rear Admiral, spoke at the International Institute of Strategic Studies in Washington, D.C. a week and a half ago. And he got up there and he said, the Biden administration is ready for a nuclear exchange with Russia, and we're going to win it, guys. This is after he started with the old Reagan saying of nuclear wars cannot be won, therefore they should never be fought. But then he turned around and said, but we're ready to fight one, and we're going to win it. I mean, this is the stupidity that exists. So, yeah, we're at World War III right now. It's begun. It has already begun. The question is, can we stop it? All wars begin. All wars will end. The question now is, can we stop World War III, which has already started, before it expands into a global termination event? And based upon the meetings I had in Congress, I'm optimistic because so many people understood the problem.
Okay.
And therefore I've always said you can't solve a problem unless you've accurately defined the problem.
Right.
Here, the problem is defined. ATACMS is the problem. The question now is the solution. I found out yesterday, because I wrote this letter, I published it in consortium, and I thought I was going to go down there and try and get people to sign on to this letter and begin this process. They already have a bill written out there for signature on this very issue. So Congress gets it. They get it. Now, there's paralysis. They're not going to be able to do anything about it. But they get it. They understand the problem. The problem now comes to, what can you get Trump to do? Because there's the solution. Congress is paralyzed. There's not enough time. People, they're going to try and do the right thing. But then you have, even if the House does something, the Senate's not going to. It's a disaster. But if they raise the issue up and identify it properly, which it appears they're doing, if that can be sent to the Trump team, and you can get Trump to articulate that under a Trump administration, continued use of ATACMS by Ukraine will not be allowed. We just stopped a global termination event. So I'm actually, for the first time, notice I slept well last night. I haven't been sleeping well for a long time because I literally am scared to death about nuclear war. I just run the numbers in my head and it just always comes out, we're all going to die. Then I wake up in the morning and say, well, I'm not accepting that. I'm going to fight and fight and fight, but I don't sleep. Last night I slept like a baby. Why? Because for the first time I was able to run the numbers and go, there's a chance. There's a chance we can stop this thing. And that's why we're doing what we're doing tomorrow, Wilmer. What you're going to be part of is a panel that's designed to talk about these very issues.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to stream it out there, not just for the American audience and the international audience. I want everybody to watch this. But I'm telling you right now, I'm streaming this out there for the Trump transition team. I'm streaming it out there for the Russian government. I want the Russian government to watch this and understand that within the United States, there are people that don't want to have a nuclear war. There are people that are trying to stop a nuclear war, and you need to help us because it's in your interest. A nuclear war will kill you. I'm not trying to get Russia to surrender. I want Russia to help me, help you. That's what I'm going to pull that whole Cuba Gooden thing. Help me, help you. Show me the money. But we're going to do something here we need Russia not to take it to the direction that they have every right to take it, to escalate in response. I need Russia to calm down, take a breath, and then we need to work with the Trump administration to do the right thing to stop the trigger of nuclear war. Look, there's not going to be an easy negotiation between Russia and the United States. Trump doesn't have a team that's capable of that. The Russians have made it clear they're not interested in negotiating based upon the conditions that Trump's trying to impose.
No, Scott, I can't accept that. I can't accept that because Trump is a Putin puppet. Stop it, Scott. Stop it, Scott. Trump is a Putin puppet.
Trump is not a Putin puppet. Trump is an egomaniac narcissist who thinks he can pick up the phone and make a phone call and make it all go away. And he brought in Keith Kellogg, who's this just lunatic neocon who thinks that he can come in and tell the Russians that you're going to have to agree to basically conceding victory to the Ukrainians and to NATO. And Russia's not. Putin already came out and said, it ain't going to happen. But that's okay. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis? It was solved by talking.
Right.
So at least Trump is saying we're going to talk with the Russians to begin the communication that hasn't been happening with things. So I'm not worried about the fact that the conversation is going to be difficult and hard.
Right. It's a conversation.
What I want to do is make sure they can talk. And they can't talk if we've all turned into radioactive dust. And the key to stopping radioactive dust is stopping the use of ATACMS missiles by Ukraine on Russia. That is it. It's the simplest solution to the most complicated problem ever.
So let me see. So Bubba is going to vote for you for president in 2028. So you got one vote.
Well,
so
there's
far.
That right in.
So far. Mile High Brother, and this takes us back into the broader global dynamic of a world war. He asks, what is there's right there. What is Russia's strategic interest in protecting Syria? So, because now, as we see what's happening with Hezbollah in Lebanon, as it relates to the Zionist settler colonial state in Israel, and we've got Iran as well, and Hamas. Now, it seems as though, as it's becoming realized by Lottie Dottie and everybody, that Ukraine's getting its ass kicked, all of a sudden, escalation in Syria. Scott Ritter.
Yeah, I mean, this is certain. One of the reasons why I said World War III has begun. You can't call Ukraine, Russia, World War III. It's a European.
And Shelley asked the same question, and a number of other people have asked the same question. Teresa, what we're looking at in Syria is the decline of a narco state. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, I mean, someday the postmortem will be done on what's
Right.
going on in Syria, and we'll get to the details of it. But you can't speak of a European conflict as a world war. That's sort of, European centric. It's of concern because if it becomes a conflict between the United States and Russia, it can terminate the world. But what we've seen now is what's happening in Syria is part of the Ukraine conflict. It is now gravitated in. This is a concerted effort by the United States, Turkey, Israel, and Ukraine to destabilize a region to the detriment of the Russian-Iranian alliance. This is an attack to break apart the axis of resistance that doesn't just benefit Israel in doing so, but in their thinking will compel Russia to divert resources to stabilize this situation and therefore diminish Russia's momentum that's going on in Ukraine. When this thing first happened, I looked at it and I said, okay, it looks like Aleppo is going to fall. But I said, no, the Syrians are moving up the 4th Armored. They're moving up the 25th Hamza Division. Tiger Force is coming in, Russian Air Force. And here come the popular militia units. They're going to stabilize this thing, and then they're going to, push them back. That this is fatal, a fatal mistake for Erdogan. Well, Erdogan just came out today and made a statement. He said, "No, we're driving to Damascus. We're taking Damascus." And he goes, "What the hell's going on in Syria? I don't understand it. The collapse of the Syrian army was not on my bingo card this year." And Russia just said all Russian citizens must evacuate Syria. That's not that's not the kind of thing that you do if you think you've stabilized the front, you're going to successfully counterattack. That's what you do when you say we don't want videos of Al-Qaeda operatives beheading Russian citizens in downtown Damascus, because that's the direction things are heading. This is a strategic defeat for the axis of resistance. Iran has to do some soul searching here because something has gone dreadfully wrong with their calculus as to what was happening in Syria. This is fatal for Hezbollah. Fatal for Hezbollah because a couple things happened. You have this Al Qaeda force HTS driving on Homs, which is not Aleppo, not Hama, Homs. They take Homs and they're going to. It cuts off the land corridor that Iran used to supply. The Israelis have already prevented the air corridor. They've told we'll shoot down any Iranian airplane landing in Damascus. Now if they take Homs, it cuts it. But something else is going on. The Syrian Defense Force, which is an American proxy, just took over Abu Kamal, which is the entry port of this resupply. So the Iranians just lost Abu Kamal. They're about to lose Homs, which means they can't resupply Hezbollah at a time when Hezbollah needs to be resupplied. They just fought this year-long war of attrition with Israel. This suddenly makes the Israeli ceasefire with Hezbollah much more practical in making sense, because the Israelis did it because their army is exhausted. But if you have a ceasefire where Iran is able to resupply and re-strengthen Hezbollah, the cycle will continue. What Israel did with the ceasefire is now stabilize that front, and now they're cutting off the umbilical cord between Iran and Hezbollah. Literally within a week, the entire strategic geopolitical situation in the Middle East has changed overnight, because if this happens, this dramatically changes everything. It changes all my assessments of the Middle East. So I should probably just shut up at this point in time, because it's like trying to tell you what your hand of cards is going to be when I take a deck and just fling it on the floor and say pick 5 random cards. This is a very, very dangerous situation for the axis of resistance. Russia has strategic interests. That exercise that they just made the phone call on that was supposed to assert some sort of Russian presence in the Mediterranean, strategic presence. Well, if Damascus falls, what's going to happen to the port of Tartus? What's going to happen to the Russian airfield, that presence there? Is Russia going to have to withdraw from Syria, or are we looking at, as some people have speculated at some point in time, the creation of this Alawite mini state that will separate itself from Syria. But all of this conversation is far removed from the conversation we were having a month ago, which was Bashar al-Assad is the strong president of Syria. Syria is united around the leadership of Bashar al-Assad. Idlib is a collapsed, failed state that's going to eventually go. That was my narrative. I don't know what the hell's happening here, but this is not good for the Russian Iranian axis. This is fantastic for Israel. This is literally, Netanyahu. I should be shot for betting against Netanyahu because I've said all along, he is the ultimate political survivor. People keep saying, you're down, you're finished. He, since October 7th, has held on because he said, I am the security savior of Israel. And everything he touched died. And it was just bad. And even with the ceasefire in Hezbollah, I'm like, that doesn't solve anything. Netanyahu's out. He won't last a month. Now, with this victory, it's a strategic victory for Israel. It changes everything. This is bad for Hamas. It's bad for the people of Palestine. This is horrible for Hezbollah. And this is fantastic for Israel. This does what Netanyahu has been looking to do, which has him come out with a strategic victory, not just against the Palestinians and Hezbollah, but against Iran, which he has been promising all along. I will defeat Iran. If this happens, it is the strategic defeat of the axis of resistance. It doesn't mean that all Israel problems go away, but overnight, the situation changes to the advantage of Israel. This is a big deal. This is a huge deal that's happening.
So Saturday the 7th from 4 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, Operation Dawn is presenting No Nuclear War, a call for reason. It's taking place at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Folks, you can go to nonuclearwar.com for additional information. Scott, just a couple of minutes. You have indicated I am going to be participating. Garland Nixon's going to be there. Margaret Kimberly's going to be there. You're going to be moderating panels. Professor Dan Kovalik, explain to the audience quickly what it is they will be able to engage in as they either come to the National Press Club with tickets or they watch this being streamed. What's the point, and what do you want people to walk away with when they're done watching this this event?
Well, the point is to stop a nuclear war, and one way to do that, again, I talked about Congress, I talked about Trump and mobilizing awareness within both Congress and Trump about the danger of nuclear war and a solution that is achievable. And again, stopping the attack of missiles against Russia does that. So there will be 3 panels that we're going to be putting together. The first panel is to reemphasize the reality of the danger that we find ourselves in regarding nuclear war. Theodore Postal, Larry Wilkerson, and Mel Goodman, a CIA analyst who was involved in the Able Archer incident in the 1980s, where we almost had an inadvertent nuclear war, and myself are going to be having this discussion. And basically, I want you to leave that panel scared to death and very concerned about this threat. Then we've succeeded. Then I'm going to turn over to 2 panels now that will talk about the potential solutions. I've always told, don't tell me there's a problem unless you come up with a solution. So we have 2 panels. The first panel will deal with how do we get the Biden administration or put pressure on the Biden administration through Congress to reverse this policy decision regarding ATACMS. And Medea Benjamin's going to come up and help me on that one because she just walked with me through Congress yesterday, and I just have so much admiration for her and her acumen about how Congress works and how to navigate. She literally inspired me about American democracy because, when people say, well, American democracy doesn't exist, I saw it exist. It ain't pretty. It's not functional, but it exists. I saw American democracy exist yesterday, and it gave me renewed faith in my fellow citizens and in the institutions. They can do better, but they exist. They do function, and that. Then the second panel is going to be on how we can get MAGA, get not just Trump, but the MAGA movement, the people who voted for non-escalation in Ukraine and for no nuclear war, how we can get them mobilized and action. These These panels aren't designed to be one-off events. We do it and then we walk away and I go, well, my job's done. These panels are the mission statement for the battle yet to come. Ladies and gentlemen, we are fully engaged in this up until Donald Trump gets sworn in as president, because this is the most dangerous time right now. It is this time where misperceptions, miscalculations, mistakes can be made that lead to a nuclear war. And we are going to have to work our butts off to prevent those miscalculations from being made, to educate people about the necessity of saying the right things to all parties involved, both domestically. And as I said, it's very important that we send a signal to Russia. We, the people, I'm not talking about negotiating on, Logan Act violations, but we, the people in the United States of America, we are allowed to have a voice. And it's important that our voice turns to the Russians and say, we're trying to fix this. Give us a chance. Give me a chance. And so that's my appeal to Putin and everybody below. Give me a chance. We can do this. And if we do this and we win, it's good for you and it's good for me.
Final point here, and this goes back to your talking about Marjorie Taylor Greene. Charles says, really, Ritter, Greene, the Christian Zionist, expletive, really, Ritter, Greene, who signed WMDS's, Greene, my God. Reiterate the point that, I've written and talked about a lot about the dangers of binary thinking. Folks, these things aren't black and white. Everything Charles just said about her is true. But even a blind squirrel can find a nut in the forest. Scott Ritter.
Well, let me put it this way. Really, Charles? Who do you want me to pick on? Really, Charles? Martin Luther King? Marxist tendencies? A man who believed in this, wanted to get out of Vietnam? Really, Martin Luther King? And yet, when you met Martin Luther King, you said he's intelligent, articulate, dynamic, and you could be amazed by him. You don't have to agree with the policies and some aspects of what he did, but you have to walk away and say, that man that I met isn't the man that the media was telling me about, that the government was trying to shoehorn into certain little boxes.
Charles, wait a minute. That's a great way to put it, Scott, because she's a Christian Zionist doesn't mean she's an idiot. It means she's a Christian Zionist. Disagree with Christian Zionism all you want, but that doesn't mean that she can't read. It doesn't mean she can't reason. You just don't like the ideological basis of her reasoning.
Well, and the other thing I'll tell Charles is this. I don't know if you've ever met her, Charles. I'm guessing you haven't. I'm guessing you're one of the vast majority of Americans who live outside of her district that have no clue who she is other than what you see. I do a lot of speaking. And you could definitely go in. I lose my temper a lot. Sometimes I get off track. My brain forgets a fact or two, and I say things that might come off as being intellectually sloppy. And you could go in there and snippet all the things I said, put together a 30-minute thing of Scott Ritter is an idiot. And damn it, that video would prove that I'm an idiot because you've got the words. You didn't meet her. I did. And if had you met her, you would have heard her say that we should stop funding Israel. Wait a minute, she's a Christian Zionist. How the hell could she say that? Because you don't know what you're talking about. She actually has thought this through. It doesn't mean that she doesn't support Israel, but what she says is Israel as a nation state should be able to support itself. There's no reason why Israel can't be responsible for making Israel work. They don't need American taxpayer money to do this when America is so desperately in need of that taxpayer money to be reinvested. Did you understand that, Charles? Oh, you weren't at the meeting. I'm sorry. I'm just telling you, you guys don't understand who this is. I'm not sitting here and saying that she's perfect. I'm not saying that everything she stands for I agree with. I can guarantee you that I was just going through Twitter today reading some things. I'm like, I don't agree with that. But that doesn't make her stupid. It doesn't make her inarticulate. It doesn't make her ignorant. It just means that she supports something that I don't. That's okay. That's what America's all about. And what I can say now is that I feel comfortable saying that I could sit down in her office and engage her responsibly on very complicated issues because she is intelligent, she is articulate, her brain works, all the things they don't want you to believe about her, and they aren't true. And so that's why I brought up Marjorie Taylor Greene, because she was extremely impressive. It doesn't mean that I support everything she stands for 100%. I can guarantee I don't. But what I can say is those people who call her stupid and this and start their thing off as, really, Scott? They don't know what they're talking about. Sorry, Charles, I don't mean to insult you, but
well, but also, this is the hand you're dealt. She is in Congress. She is a part of the process. You can't get things done without that's democracy.
And if you don't want her in, get her, tell her district not to vote for her.
But she's there.
Yeah.
That's a reality that all of the invectives and all of the insults and you can't ignore her.
No, and this is one other thing about her that people should, because I walked away a big Marjorie Taylor Greene fan. Why?
Okay. I probably would never do that, but okay.
No, Wilmer, I can guarantee you, I'll promise you this. It's a guarantee. Okay. Had you been at that meeting, you would have walked away and went, whoa, that's not what I was expecting. If I told you that she's good, that she's now in the government oversight committee, and she holds she's going to head a subcommittee where she gets to hold hearings on anything she wants. Mm-hmm. And she said, for instance, she's going to take on the military-industrial complex and start diverting money out of the military into where it's needed in society. You against that?
No, I just don't believe her.
I do. Okay. Because she's been given the remit. Okay. She's been given the remit. It's her committee. And she said, because she said the same thing. She said, they say they're going to let me do this.
Okay.
She goes, do I think they're going to let me do this? I don't know, but I'm going to do it anyways.
I'll believe it when I see it. And my saying that I could walk away from the meeting and not be a Marjorie Taylor Greene fan is because the positions I've heard her take on other issues are so diametrically opposed to what I know to be true that I don't know how that could happen. Doesn't mean it wouldn't. As I sit here now, it'd be a challenge. So,
well, what I would say is,
I'll sit down and talk. I'll sit down and talk to her.
Love to have her on the show. You could have her on the show. You could talk to her. She's articulate. She's intelligent. And that's what I'm saying. As I said, there's a whole bunch of things she says that I don't agree with.
Right.
But that doesn't make her a bad person. That doesn't make her ignorant. That doesn't make her ill-informed, etc. There might be some topics that she is ill-informed on. None of us are a walking encyclopedia of all the world's data. We all have to do our homework.
Well, and unfortunately, too many of us don't. We listen to the mainstream, we follow those narratives, and we unfortunately get led down the ugly imperialist empire rabbit hole. Well, Scott Ritter, I am going to see you tomorrow from 4 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time at Operation Dawn's No Nuclear War, A Call for Reason, which is being held at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C. Folks, go to nonuclearwar.com for additional information. Scott, I will see you there tomorrow. I got to thank you so much because you are incredibly busy today doing what you do. So your carving out time for me today is greatly, greatly appreciated. Thank you so much, and I will see you tomorrow.
Thanks.
Folks, thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned for new episodes every day, Monday through Friday. Please follow and subscribe, leave a review, share the show, follow us on social media. You see all the links to the show below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See you again next time. Until then, I am Wilmer Leon. Have a great weekend. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.